I have my Android head unit booted up. I do not currently have it connected to the internet, but I did install a few applications via the wired USB port, and I'm going to go show you some of them now. There are 3 applications that you can use to try to figure out whether or not the specifications for your Android head unit are being done accurately or not. The first is the fake device test, and I'll put the information in the description of how you get these apps. When I run the fake device test on this Android device, nothing happens. It just flickers and nothing occurs. That's a telltale sign that this Android head unit has the operating system patched to actually detect the actual app fake device test and stop it from running, to stop a consumer from realizing that the information in the listing is not true. So when fake device test doesn't operate on your device, that's a telltale sign that there's something the manufacturer or the sellers are trying to hide. Another app that could reveal the settings is AIDA64. And we'll go ahead and try to run AIDA64. And when I go ahead and try to run AIDA64, you see it briefly starts up, and then the operating system goes ahead and catches it and stops it from operating as well. So that's further proof that this Android head unit has something to hide, doesn't want the user or the consumer to know what the true specifications are of the device itself. There are a few other ways of finding out the specific information. There's a few other apps. I happen to load a third app called DevCheck, and that got past this particular device manufacturer's attempts to stop it revealing its true information. So I'm going to go ahead and run DevCheck right now, and that's going to start. And when we take a look at what it tells us, there's a couple of important things to note. First of all, I had said that this device was sold as running Android 13. Well, you can clearly see on the bottom, this is an Alps UJC20164, and it clearly says that it's running Android 9. And it is. It's not running anywhere close to Android 13. The other thing that I had said was the seller had promoted this device as having 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigs of storage. And you can see right here, the RAM is 4 gigs, which is good. And the storage is 64 gigs, which is also good. So this device is faking its Android version, but it's not faking the RAM and it's not faking the storage. If we look at the CPU, it is an 8257, and it is coming up as an 8257. However, another thing that's commonly faked is the number of cores. This particular ARM processor really only has 4 cores, but the seller purports that this device is an 8-core device, and that's not true. Now, out of all these specifications, what really matters? Given what DevCheck reports as the reality of this device, does it really matter that it's reporting a spoofed version of the Android operating system? Well, I would say of all the things that it's faking, that's probably the least of your concerns. The most important thing with these devices are that the RAM and the storage are accurate. The RAM is important because if you really have less physical RAM than you purchased, that's going to cause the Android operating system to run very, very poorly as it's choked of its operating system storage area. The storage number is also very important because if you don't get the full storage that you paid for, then you're going to be limited to a certain extent by how much media or additional apps you can install on the device before you run out of physical room. So RAM is the most important thing to be accurate, and storage probably would be the secondary thing to be most accurate. The rest of the items, how many cores you have, and what version it really is of Android, it's less important. I will say that even though this device is faking its Android version and it's faking number of cores, the unit runs as smooth as butter. So to the uninitiated, who cares that it's Android 9? If it performs well with the hardware that was assembled for this device, the screen, the I/O, if everything runs without any lags, awesome, that's great. The other thing I'll talk about that's related to this is when you use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Those are a little bit of resource intensive. The performance you get with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto is partially dependent on whether or not you have enough resources to run the head end, and then the rest of it is dependent upon the configuration of your phone. So on this particular Android head unit, I run Android Auto with my Pixel 5, and the Pixel 5 starts up immediately, and the entire experience, and I've been on hours-long drives with the unit in my car, it runs without crashing, without stopping, everything's beautiful. So with my son's Samsung X Cover, which is a slightly older, less powerful phone, his device on the same Android head unit takes quite a bit longer, maybe a minute or two, to actually connect up to the head unit and get all of its pieces loaded in Android Auto. And then after it kind of figures things out, then about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes into a drive session, it will have enough of its software loaded in the phone that it starts to behave quite normally. So it's the same Android head unit, same specs, same RAM, same storage, but the Pixel 5 phone performs much, much better as a host for Android Auto with this device as compared to a Samsung X Cover Pro phone. So the phone that you're going to use to pair with this device, if you're going to use it in that mode, is actually probably more important than the specs of the unit itself. That being said, RAM, 4 gigs, my opinion, with Android 8, 9, those versions that are being distributed in these units. 4 gigs is really the minimum that you want to have. If you want to run Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, if you get a 2 gig unit or a 1 gig unit, it's either not going to work well because Android's going to stutter, or it's just not going to be a good experience. So spend the extra dollars, I would say, in my opinion, to make sure you get a unit with a minimum of 4 gigs of RAM. Do you need more? Probably or probably not. If you're going to do a lot of offline stuff, maybe you need more RAM. But if you're only going to use it as a host for Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, you probably don't need more than 4 gigabytes of RAM to run this Android system. And storage, again, if you're going to do mostly Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, you probably don't need more than 64 gigs or 128 gigs of storage unless you want to store a whole bunch of media like DVD movies or lots of audio for offline use. So those should guide your ideas as far as what you need to purchase. So that's the story on this whole concept of Android head units and the specifications being faked. Unfortunately, since the vendors went out of their way to hide or obfuscate these things, the only real way to know for absolutely sure is to take the screws off and take a look at the chips underneath the heat sinks. After you've purchased the unit, is that really the extent that you want to go through? I would probably say no. I mean, if you know what you're getting into and you boot it up on a bench and it runs reasonably well before you have an opportunity to put the device in your car, well, okay. So it works reasonably well on the bench, so I'll go ahead and put it in the car and keep it. If it doesn't work well or you run into difficulties while you're in the setup phase, or the information that these apps end up giving you show that they've really under spec'd the device, then it's probably worth returning.